Yeah, you
Yes.
worked for Sri Lankan Airlines for a long time and you've traveled all over the world. But I know your life story is as interesting and a lot of those aspects go into your book. But let's focus on the book for now and let's talk about your short stories. How would you describe the Ayah and Other Short Stories? How would you describe the
Well,
book?
I would say it's a mixture of truth and fiction. I mean, some things are really true, which have happened either in my life or in the life of somebody close to me. And there are things from fiction, or else it might just have a fictitious ending. You could start up with the truth and finish off with the ending. Yeah. If you want me to show the audience the book, it's
Yeah, please.
this,
A bit. Yeah, 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 yeah. Correct. Yeah, we
and
can see
it's
it.
published by Amaryllis Manjul India, and the back cover is this. And there has been an interesting article actually because of this mask. It is I don't remember the name yet. I think I sent it to the link to you, but I don't remember. But I think it's something like the blog spot or one of those written by an Indian actually. So that's nice to know that it's being read, because very often it's read outside and not in India, not where it was published. But just to have that little bit of critique was good. Yeah.
So the Aya actually is a Portuguese influenced word, right? And I was intrigued. It's one of those thousands of Asian words which are defined by the Portuguese by old colonial histories kind of things. And though its origins are probably forgotten, and it's the Ayak is somewhere in between a maid and a kind of babysitter or something of that sort. How,
Exactly, a kind of a nanny figure who is loyal to
yeah.
the family and who doesn't only look after children, who does much more, who becomes part of the family. And it's interesting because the word ayah seems to exist in so many languages. I know it exists in Arabic, though it probably doesn't mean the same thing, and I think in some Indian languages too. But then you would know more about the Indian
Yes,
languages than I would.
that's true.
Because Sinhalese
That's
is kind of, it's away from all the other languages, you see, Sinhalese. It's just on its own because it's a mixture of Pali and Sanskrit both. So we can't really relate. I can't understand someone who's speaking Hindi and yeah.
That's true with a lot of Indians also. We can't understand one another, but that's a different point. Anyway,
Yeah.
which is your favorite story in the book, Shanice, and why?
Personally, I like Amidst Orchids, and the readers like the Moon Sisters and some others. I also like the letter. I like the letter because I wrote it based on a kind of a live experience in Malaysia. Actually, spending New Year's Eve in Malaysia, I mean, it's a Muslim country, and then I somehow had this fantasy of wearing a black lace dress and going to a simple place where only families met to eat. So it was so different to New Year's Eve, either in Sri Lanka or in France or whatever. And there was this night watcher who was really drunk and who was singing right through the night. Then those dogs barking, it's very atmospheric. And I like that one. Then I also liked Amidst Orchids, maybe because of some connotations, some touch of Sri Lanka in it. And also how I started it. Once again, I wrote something on people I knew actually. So it's kind of special to me.
When we
Something
discuss,
that's it.
sorry,
Yeah.
sorry. When
I
when we
said,
discuss a short story, we are not doing justice to it at all because the feelings and the sentiments that the short story kind of puts across, reading it is really amazing. Talking about it is something else. So I really enjoyed reading even amidst orchids and things like that. Would you like to read maybe 3-4 paragraphs of it from some part of the story? Because there's so much poignancy, there's so much expectancy. You're just waiting to see what's next in that sense. So just to give the listener a sense of your writing, would you like to read a little bit?
sure. So it's actually page 57 amidst orchids. And I enjoyed this even more when I read it with a man. because I think that the only kind of presentation or whatever that I did in France, in a literary association sort of run by the translators, I read like one paragraph, and James, who is American and a sculptor, he read the rest. So it was kind of fun. Anyway, I'll read it. Amidst orchids, I'm going blind, she said, barely looking at him, continuing to tend the orchids in the damp but sunny bathroom. The sunlight found its way through the fig tree's meshed shadow. It caught the auburn reflections of her hair, brightened her face, dropped down to the silver chain that she so loved, and the last beads from which had been ripped off by a baby's grip. He noticed no tremor in her voice, no fear, just a statement. Her hand came to rest on the orchid leaves. Short nails, he thought, natural, no nail polish. She wore no rings on her fingers, just a thin silver band on the fourth finger, a reminder of what he would have liked to forget but couldn't, nor could she. Should he pursue the topic or let it drop? What should the course of action be? He saw her once or twice during the year, caught her voice on the phone for a few seconds, once in a while, and then forgot her existence until their next meeting in a crowded place. They knew their roles, what convention and decorum expected from them, and the words would stumble out. How are you? Haven't seen you for a long time. How is business? I'd ask for advice, he heard himself say, cutting the silence short. We can research on the subject. It might not be that bad. Maybe I've read too much into what the doctors say. I'm almost going to stop now. No, she looked up from the orchids this time and faced him for a second. The intensity of her expression always affected him so much that he couldn't help holding his breath. The doctors can't keep the truth from me, she continued. There you are. I'll stop there.
So of course, no plot spoilers and things like that. But at the same time, I just like to ask that when you're writing this short story, when I'm reading it, I'm
Yeah.
always wondering who are these two people? What is the equation between them? Where is Chanis taking us to? Where is the story going to end? So so do all your short stories go through this process, and are you leading us on and really keeping the tension till the very end? Is that your formula?
Actually, when I first wrote the Ayah, I just did it. I didn't know anything about short story techniques. But as I went on, I realized that you had to kind of lead the reader on. You couldn't lose him on the way. And you had to lead him on for a purpose. And for some people, they cannot take the twist at the end. But I quite enjoy doing the twist at the end.
The twist at the end, yeah, that's
Yeah.
typically Janice in that sense. The Aya also has a quite a dramatic twist in that sense, no?
Yes,
And
but
sorry.
no, but when I wrote the I was 18, and I didn't know a thing about short story writing. Actually, it just there was a competition. I felt I wanted to win it, whether it was second, third, compete in something, and I went on and got into it without knowing a thing about short story writing. As I went on, of course, I read so many people,
So that
especially.
brings us that brings us sorry that brings us to the next point that
Yeah.
what's the process of short story writing? How did you learn it? What would you recommend to people wanting to enter the field?
I didn't really learn it. I think as you go on, it kind of grows on you. It doesn't mean you're a good writer, it just means that you get more into the process. But I was also fortunate because my father used to read a lot, and he read short stories of Guy de Maupassant, French.
Yeah.
Then, of course, Steinbeck and all that. And then as I went on, I even read the modern ones or Roland Dahl and everything. And sometimes you see, if you give your short stories to be read by your family members, they are kind of the most severe critics. And my nephew once said, but nothing happens in them. So then from that point on, I wanted something to happen. I was writing the story on Jaffna, and then I concentrated, on how she was eating the mango for people to feel how luscious it was, to feel the juice come down and all that. And then they're always scared of this balance of, if you put too much description, then can you still, lead your readers on without getting bored? I've even had people tell me, but why don't you just leave it to the reader? Why do you give so much? But I guess it depends on how we are and what makes us and what we're made of, like I think I'm somebody who's quite intense, and I'm a Taurus, by the way, and I like going to the end of what I do.
No,
And
I love the descriptions because that's part of the journey is actually in sailing, not only in arriving, but the descriptions and the kind of uh, points you take us through while weaving the story. That's fascinating to me.
yeah.
But Shanice, having encountered so many different parts of the world, both in
Hmm.
your work and in your migration, how would you rate? How would you see the different kinds of, say, storytelling trends in different parts of the world? I mean, that's a broad question, but
Yeah,
obviously it's something very culture specific. And our storytelling. I'm guessing that storytelling in Sri Lanka is not the same as in Europe, for example. It comes from a
no,
different
no,
tradition.
I don't
Yeah.
think so. And it would not be the same readership either, right? Because, for instance, stories I write, I'm not really sure I would have so much of a European audience. I still feel that there's something about it which shows where I come from, where I was born, what I was brought up with, some of the values and the ideas and the traditions. And I feel that this book can definitely relate more to Asia. And unfortunately, I'd love to answer you, but I don't know much about, the African culture or what's really kind of stories related there and everything. I have not looked into it enough. Probably should.
But there's
Probably.
this huge global trend nowadays of migration and things like that, which brings us
Yeah.
to, Asian authors abroad, the kind of Facebook page which you started and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Obviously, there is some very deep intercultural, cross cultural things happening across the globe. Do you see signs of that among people of your generation, people who have migrated and writing for two, three audiences or more?
Uh, well, yes and no, but actually, when I think of people and migration, it would almost relate to my work because, as you know, at the moment, after leaving the airline business at the end of 2015, I have kind of struggled and got into the world of interpretation. And it's not that luxurious profession of conference interpreting, but more court interpreting. And I've also replaced my colleagues at the asylum offices and everything. So I see the struggle of migration and of people often missing their homes through their writing. Because actually, you'll find more people writing about where they come from once they leave than ever in their home situations, isn't it? We are either comfortable or bored in our home situations, so we don't write when we are at home, but we all write when we are away. Or you might
That's so
write about.
true. Yeah, that's so true. I had this friend of mine who was based in the Gulf, and he would grumble and say that today I've got stuck in a 4-hour traffic jam and it's so boring and life is so tough here.
Right.
So I would tell him like you're at your creative best when you're there. And when he came down, he got caught up in so many things that he didn't write as much as he was when he was there. So that's so true. But your story, Shanice, take us through a whole lot of themes. I was looking at migration, myth, in that sense, maybe a bit of terrorism, a lot of Asia in your stories, uh,
Yes,
middle class Asia also, and also the other sectors of Asia, and of course a lot of gender voices. Someone commented on your work that this is the first Sri Lankan lady author whom I've read. I mean, I've read a lot of male authors, but
yes, I think it was Surur in talking about books, is it? Was it three? I
I
don't
think so.
remember.
Okay.
Right. And some of the incidents are true. Like, for instance, when I speak about Mogadishu, one year when I went there on holiday, my parents were actually getting ready to go for a requiem mass because one of the diplomats had been swallowed up by a shark.
Oh gosh.
So that was really true. And every time I think of the beaches in Somalia, I kind of think of the abattoir and the fact that the blood from the abattoir used to attract these sharks. So some of these things are really, they're not really made up. Yeah.
You've lived through very interesting times, but how much of your short stories would be non-fiction in that sense?
It's, shall we say it's kind of 50-50 or 45.
Wow.
35. It's,
Wow.
yeah, yeah.
It's stranger
But
and life is stranger than fiction, as they say.
yeah, I guess like lots of people, I'd love to know how to read, how to write a novel or something, but I don't think it's my style. I like to put all my intensity in a short story and then finish it, in whatever way I choose to finish it. But a novel means so much discipline, and I know there are people who spend between 3 and 10 years. So I don't think that would be my style because I do so many things at the same time, whether it's language learning, working. I don't see myself retiring. I think I'll kind of keep working for a long time. And
Want to
actually,
go? Yeah.
talking about, sorry.
No, carry on,
Yeah.
carry on.
And talking about broadcasting, actually, when I was, I think, 17 or 18, I did go to Radio Ceylon and I tried. I had never taken elocution classes at that time. I mean, I still haven't, but well, I had to go through, education in phonetics and all that here. So kind of speak differently to when I first came out. But I went to Radio Ceylon for an interview and I was not chosen, but I always remember that. And in interpretation, part of the fun is also the way you speak. I'm not talking about the quote, but when you're interpreting in other places or whether you get to do it on the radio, that would be fun. And I'm also looking into kind of reading these stories in some way, in whatever place which is available. That would be also a good opportunity to get it for it to be known
Since
for
you
the
mentioned
stories.
Radio Ceylon played a huge role in our teenage life in the 70s and things like that, when it was a very popular and very westernized radio station, and many people in our parts of the world, Goa, the West Coast, enjoyed Ceylon. And Ceylon actually, or the SLBC as it was called later, it actually created stars in Indian on the Indian music scene, including, of course, in English and in Konkani and a whole lot of things, and Hindi, of course, also. So there were
Okay.
stories of people going and getting played on, going straight from the airport to at the SLBC and getting broadcast there and all this. I mean, the connections between Goa and Sri Lanka have always intrigued me, which is one of the reasons why we are talking here and now. But coming back to your short stories, I found another one with a very Shanisian twist, if you want to call it that, is
Sure.
Moon Sisters. Moon Sisters,
Yes. Yeah. True.
yeah.
Uh,
And so, without
I
spoiling the plot, can you?
exactly. It started off with just everyday scene in the office. Starting off with calculating airfares and difficult passengers and also difficult bosses. Like those who would not respect people's religious customs. Like my colleague was Jewish, and there was no way she could get the Yom Kippur day off. And she
This
was
is in
also
France.
extremely
This
difficult.
is in France or in Sri
Yes,
Lanka?
it was in
In France.
France. Yeah, in France, you get, like in Sri Lanka, you get so many different religions and so many different communities. And of course, you're supposed to respect. And I hope we'll continue to respect each other's communities because that is really I think, the richest part of us all coming from different places. But unfortunately, the more life goes on, more people become intolerant. And for instance, talking about intolerance, I've been to India quite a few times, but I never got to go to the Kashmir area. And I hope I can one day because of the usual problems.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. As far as your languages go, of course, Sinhalese and English and French, and now Portuguese. How? How? Why?
Um, well, Sri Lanka was colonized both by, well, not both, but by the Portuguese, the Dutch, and the British. It doesn't seem to be a very good reason, but it's nice to know all three languages. But I think I didn't want to continue my Spanish because everybody in France almost has taken Spanish as a second language. You see, in France, there's a whole kind of hierarchy, and I think the science students, the time that my husband was studying, they were supposed to do German, and the art students were kind of considered. I mean, they were supposed to do Spanish. They usually did English as well, and also Spanish is very close to French. So when I came to France in my first degree year, I had to do Spanish whether I wanted to or not. And later, as I wanted to get into interpreting, I realized I didn't want to do Spanish because everybody did it. I had to do something different. And we had a Brazilian student who came and stayed with us for some time. So it kind of seemed natural to start off with Portuguese and from with Brazilian Portuguese, and also the music. I mean, I think you can't beat Portuguese for music, whether it's the Brazilian part of the bossa nova or the foro, or whether it's the Portuguese part of the fado. And as a music lover and somebody whose grandfather played the accordion, my sisters play the piano, I play a little bit, especially the guitar. So languages and music go together, and so it's Portuguese as, let's see, English, French, Sinhalese, and Portuguese, and I understand Spanish and I understand
Wow.
other languages also, but you can't work on all of those. So I choose a few languages to work on. And Portuguese, I'm hoping to make it into what you call a C language. That would be A would be English, French would be B, and C, so that sometime or the other I could help out at conferences and all that with a third language. You cannot do conference interpretation with just two languages. You have to qualify, etc., with three languages. But
So
I'm also fascinated by Bengali and Urdu, but I don't know when I'll get down to those.
you consider yourself a linguist, definitely.
Yeah, but a linguist who doesn't know everything, because I think a linguist should also really further his studies in linguistics, not only languages. And my knowledge of linguistics is, I would say, quite basic for the moment. But I have done phonetics, and I read a lot about the roots of languages and where words come from, and whether it's or where people come from. So anthropology on one side and roots of languages on the other side. Yeah.
Shanis, why is it so tough for short story writers to get published? I mean, I could have asked myself this question, but from your point of view,
Shall we ask the question the other way? Like, who reads them? That's a problem. I've often thought of trying to deliver books, whether mine or others, in hospitals where people are just lying there not having anything to do. But will they have the energy to read them? So I think basically we need readers. If we have short stories, then we should also have more reading of the short stories going on. What do you think? Because the problem is to get people interested in them. When I sit
I'm
in the metro today, I would see people more with their telephones than reading a book, especially since the COVID. But still, if they were to read a book, they would be reading a novel or something on crime or, crime, sex, the usual ingredients. But it's not on short stories. Is it old fashioned, I wonder? Is it something of a certain era? I just don't know.
Or is it cultural? Does it work better in some countries and not in others? Do we have traditions of short story creations? Does the fact that newspapers would encourage short stories make a difference and they don't anymore in that sense? Because the Portuguese papers in Goa, for example, had a specific space for short stories. Not
Yeah,
anymore, apparently. So
you're
it's all those kind
definitely
of.
right. I think it's kind of gone out of Europe. It might come back again. But in Sri Lanka, in India, in the subcontinent, we could definitely encourage it by short story competitions, what they used to do when we were young, or what the British Council used to do. The other places also, Alliance Francaise, CAMOS, they could also encourage. I think there is not enough encouragement. At the same time, there are still some short story competitions going on, but you know that they always have a fee. Sometimes it could be a minimal fee, but all that means signing up, getting into accounts. Nothing's easy like before when you had to send off that 25 rupees or 50 rupees and you could join a competition. So I think people, whether it's the whole newspaper world or whatever, people should be trying to encourage and build kind of this trend actually. Yeah.
That's a very interesting point, because I'm not sure whether supply creates its own demand or demand will create its own supply in that sense. You know,
No, I
that's
think we need
a
both.
debate.
And yeah, for instance, if you think of the Commonwealth short story competition and everything, and so many people from developing countries joining, I think there should maybe be the money aspect also, not of the person having to pay to get into it, but of being paid, of the reward aspect. So much to do
Yeah.
actually in this field.
At one stage, BBC had their World Service short story competition, and I actually
That's
know two or three persons, if I'm not mistaken, from Goa, who managed
right.
to get their stories selected and read
Okay,
worldwide. And in those days, we are
great.
talking about the BBC in the 70s, when radio was a thing. You know, it was so influential. They don't make much
Definitely.
of it, but they are amazing writers still today. You know, in that sense.
Right.
I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't know how we break the jinx. Would you like to end by just reading a little from another of your favorite stories, just so that
Well,
we get a sense of your words?
right. Let me see. Well, did you actually manage to read Disappeared from Room 307? No.
No, not that, not that.
Yeah, that was rather long actually. Let's see. I'm trying to
I'm
think
going
of.
to do it. I'm going to do it.
Okay, no problem. I was just thinking, I had not thought of a second. So, what can I think of
Yeah.
right now? Something short. The one called Unhooked, maybe, if it's. Oh, well, just since I spoke about it before, the end of the soup kitchen, because you see, very often when subjects are not pleasant, people don't want to think about them. People don't want to think of people who are starving or people who go to soup kitchens. But I think they're not things we can forget about. We could go on holiday, we could sit on in restaurants, we could have a good time, and then there are always those people who have to manage. Well, I'm just reading an end actually. I don't know if it will make much sense. But after all the activity in the soup kitchen, we then come to this part of it where Romero has taken over the soup serving now, as he often does towards the latter part of the evening. Standing casually, sporting one earring, kind, concerned, a daily appearance. Roberto the cook takes stock of what's left, brings in sufficient food trays to help each helper before it's over, and dishes out compliments to all the women not yet in their 70s. He even stops near Josephine. "Good night, my princess," he says, and she smiles a faint, distant smile. It's almost closing time. The lights grow dimmer. The guard has instructions not to let anyone in any more, and the night is closing in. You see the wistfulness on their faces as they wander out in the night. For a few, a sheltered place to sleep, a temporary abode. For some, a bench, a cardboard box, or someone's doormat to sleep on. Josephine steps the night, already absent of the hostile world outside, her bag of provisions held tight in her hand like a talisman. It ends there. I'd invite people to read the whole story because if not, it was just it's a soup kitchen in Paris. Because
Really fascinating. I really enjoy your descriptions. It's almost like the next best thing, like being there in that sense. And you're always
thank you for
wondering what
doing
next.
this.
What next?
Thank you.
Having
It's
said that,
nice.
thank you for your time. Real pleasure talking to you, and thanks for sharing your experiences. But before letting you go, your three tips to wannabe short story writers. Your three top tips.
First, to read. You cannot write unless you read. Read every day. Write whenever you feel like it. Take a little notebook with you. Keep it in your handbag because inspiration comes in at unexpected times. For me, it has sometimes come in the courthouse, and I'm not allowed to use a computer or phone in the courthouse. So I have a scrappy little thing in which I'd write down whatever comes into my head. And well, fortunately, I always hear my name. I always know which case I'm supposed to enter in and where I'm supposed to interpret, so I don't get lost in my world. And well, so I said to read every day, to keep something to write, and if you can, read things that are varied from different cultures, and also try to feed yourself, I mean, to nurture yourself with cultures from other places, because one can never live in a monocultural world or feel that one's thing is the best. It's only when we get things from everywhere else.
Thank you so much, Shanice. Thank you
Thank,
for your time
thank
and
you,
thank you for
Federica.
sharing your experience and knowledge.
Thank you, Federica. I know how busy you are.
No,
As I
it's
told
always
you
a
the
pleasure. I'm not
other
busy. I'm just busy doing these kind of things, but I enjoy learning from all of y'all.
day.
Thanks.
Okay, thank
I'll
you.
end the stream here. Thank you.
Yes, thank you